Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. It's my very great pleasure to introduce Dr. Stephen Cave. We are talking today, or he is talking today, about the age of AI, myths, risks, and opportunities. He is the director of the Leverhulme Institute for the Future of Intelligence. I think it would be fair to say that he's talking more about the philosophy and ethics and the opportunities of digital transformation through the lens of AI. He is a world leader in this field, and we are very privileged to have him here today. He is, when he's not doing the day job, an advisor to government and has served as a diplomat for the UK, and is also an author on many different aspects of digital transformation. I should say that my name's Martin McConnell, and I'm having the privilege of introducing him because I'm chair of the Alumni Advisory Board. But on that note, I'm passing over to the true hero, Stephen.
Thank you very much, Martin, and it's wonderful to see so many of you giving up an hour of your Saturday afternoons to come and hear about, and hopefully in the Q&A talk about, the age of AI. This isn't a how-to session. It's not about building the Terminator or your own version of ChatGPT. I'm going to give a very big picture view of technological transformation and try to situate the current AI moment within it so that we can hopefully get a realistic idea of some of the opportunities and challenges ahead. So it has nothing to do with the Terminator. I don't know if that's disappointing, or The Matrix, or any of your other favorite science fiction films. I'm a great science fiction fan myself. I certainly think there are many ways in which we can benefit from exploring possible futures through fiction. But today I'm going to do something more like the opposite and look more to history to try to help us understand the current moment and how we can prepare for the age of AI that is already upon us, although I would say we probably haven't seen anything yet. So, we've got housekeeping notes. There we go. So that's an outline of what I'm going to talk about today. So before we really dive into the big picture, I'm going to give you an overview of what we work on in my part of the university. So as Martin said, I'm the director of the Leverhulme Centre for the Future of Intelligence, which was opened by the late, great Stephen Hawking, who, back in 2014, 2015, was talking about the coming AI age and bringing attention to something that now seems so obvious to us. And in our centre, we think very broadly about how to make the AI thing go well. So we have engineers, machine learning scientists who are working on transparency and bias in their algorithms, but also humanities and social science scholars who are thinking about social justice and how it will be impacted by these technologies, and many other different topics related to AI. Now, I also oversee, as head of department, two other centres. One of them is a very new, CHIA, the Centre for Human-Inspired AI. And instead of being worrywarts like those of us in my centre, these are the optimists who are trying to do exciting things for the good of humanity with AI. But then the real worrywarts, my dear colleagues in the Centre for the Study of Existential Risk, who are thinking about how all of this might end humanity. They don't only think about AI, although they do think about AI, but they also think about volcanic risk and nuclear weapons and synthetic biology and many other kinds of risk. And this centre was very largely inspired by the work of Lord Martin Rees, who many of you will know his work. I'm sure he's done a lot to draw attention to the extent to which our civilization is more precarious than we like to think. And this centre's existed for 10 years, but in recent years, I think we've had some shocks that have reminded us of how fragile our civilization is. The pandemic, of course, the rise of powerful AI, a war on mainland Europe, including involving a nuclear power and so on. So ensuring there is a world fit for our children and grandchildren is work, and that's the work that my colleagues in CSER, the Centre for Extinction Risk, are doing. And shortly we will be launching something called the Institute for Technology and Humanity, which is a kind of umbrella for these three research centres. It will give them a permanent home within the university. I hope it will also build on the success of these centres. These centres are all at the moment really pioneering interdisciplinary, outward-looking and impact-focused work. And that can be a struggle in an academic system built around disciplines to do interdisciplinary work like that. But they have been doing it very successfully, and this institute will be a home for exactly such research centres. And I think it's a real sign of the university's confidence and investment in that kind of interdisciplinary and outward-looking work. So, that's the introduction. Now, one of my main messages for today is going to be that technological transformation is accelerating. So let's just think about the moment that we're in, what we've seen in our lifetime. So I'm 50. Just over 50 years ago, humans first landed on the moon. That was an incredible achievement. Some of you will have might remember it, might have seen it, while it was happening. And it's all the more incredible when you think about the technology that was available at the time. You've probably heard it said that we all carry around more computing power than was used to put humans on the moon. It's true by many, many orders of magnitude. The Apollo guidance computer had approximately 32K RAM. That's about enough for one Word document. And 72K ROM. So the latest iPhone has 8 gigabytes of RAM. That's 2 million times the Apollo computer's computing power. But that's all right, because the Apollo astronauts had a sextant. Actually, literally. It didn't quite look like this, but they did indeed use a sextant. So, after the moon landings in the 70s and 80s, of course, we saw the rapid rise of the digital computer, and the start of a digitization process we're still living through. In the 90s, we saw the incredibly rapid rise of the internet. In the 2000s, we saw the rise of mobile technology. And now, in the last decade, we've seen some real breakthroughs in AI, as well as many other technologies, like genetic engineering and robotics and battery technologies and so on. So there's no one single way of measuring technological change, but there are proxy metrics that we can use, like economic productivity, or the number of patents or significant inventions, and so on. And by any such metric, the rate of technological progress in the past 50 years that I've just sketched has been accelerating. So it's not just that there is progress, but the rate of progress in terms of new inventions is accelerating. But not only have we seen that acceleration in the course of our lifetimes, we see exactly that acceleration for as far back as we can look throughout all of human history, that is, all of the history of Homo sapiens. So, in the past half century, I've just sketched some of the incredible transformations that have made life, utterly different to when I was born. And we could say that that amount of technological progress in the past half century, in terms of number of inventions and so on, was at least as much as in the preceding 200 years. That is, the digital revolution has happened much faster than the Industrial Revolution, from about 1750 to 1950. And yet the Industrial Revolution itself was a time of incredibly rapid change by any kind of historic standard. I mean, think of the development of factories and railways and cars, planes, electrification, enormous transformations that completely changed the face of the planet, of cities, and so on. So, indeed, if we look at the number of inventions during the Industrial Revolution, we see that there are at least as many as there were in the preceding 2,000 years. And yet, if we look at the last 2,000 years, this is a bit hard to understand this curve, but because it's very hard to squeeze the rate of acceleration of invention into one graph that doesn't look like a horizontal line followed by a vertical line. So that's, of course, what exponential change looks like. So in this graph, in our lifetime, we see milestones happening on the diagonal line, and before that, the wiggly lines are 1,000 years, and then the circular lines go to tens of thousands of years. So, but my point is, in the last 2,000, so we saw as much change in the Industrial Revolution as the preceding 2,000 years. But the preceding 2,000 years were a time of incredible change. when you think about the rise of Greek culture and Roman culture, of imperial China and so on, there were so many phenomenal inventions in that period. The printing press, gunpowder, windmills, lenses and so on. So it was an incredibly productive time, those preceding 2,000 years. Indeed, we could say that in those 2,000 years, there were more inventions than in the preceding 10,000 years, the 10,000 before that, which is about basically from when humans first started settling and developed agriculture. Yet those 10,000 years were an incredibly rich period of invention. When the first cities arose, agriculture developed and metalworking, the Bronze Age, the Stone Age, and so on. In fact, in those 10,000 years, we saw as much progress as in the preceding 300,000 years, which is about the history of Homo sapiens. But those 300,000 years saw incredible innovation compared to the preceding millions of years of, Homo erectus and so on, in which we saw humans master clothing and fire and spears and other, totally transformative technologies that, they could arrive in a continent like Australia 45,000 years ago and completely transform the face of that continent using technologies like spears and fire and so on. So you can see the point I'm making is that technology is not just developing, not just new innovations, it's not just transforming, it's doing so exponentially. That is, the rate of technological development is constantly accelerating. And this is a hallmark of our species. But for the longest time, this technological transformation was still painfully slow. It might be the case that, 200,000 years ago, there were many important innovations that Homo sapiens had made compared to our earlier ancestors. And still, one generation to the next would see very, very little change. So thousands of years might go by with people basically living in the same way. And of course, that started to speed up in the last 10,000 years with settlements, when people started seeing change in the centuries. And then in the last few hundred years with the Industrial Revolution, we started seeing change in the decades, and then in our lifetime, years, and perhaps now even months or weeks. I mean, one illustration of that is the development of large language models. So who here has tried ChatGPT or a similar kind of language model? Or maybe another generative AI like the ones that make pictures like DALL-E or Midjourney? If you haven't tried, I suggest doing so. They're very easy to use. Just Google GPT and type in a question, and it will give you an extremely compelling answer. And it hasn't just copied and pasted from Wikipedia. You won't find that text anywhere else on the internet. It's genuinely compiled it from its vast database to deliver something personalized for you. And ChatGPT, appeared last year. It didn't entirely appear from nowhere, so this traces the number of data points that these GPT-type language models have been using since 2017. There's a slightly earlier history. Machine learning has really been, so I'm sure you're familiar with the term machine learning. Today, when we talk about AI, largely we're talking about a field of computer science called machine learning, which is quite different to the kind of AI that was around in the latter half of the 20th century, when people were trying to program in very specific ways exactly what they thought, cutting-edge knowledge looked like. So they would ask experts, how do you do this? And they would try to program it. They were sort of expert systems. And machine learning doesn't work like that. It learns from very large databases. That's been around since about 2012. That was when there were a few really big breakthrough papers anyway. Chatbots or conversational agents like ChatGPT have been around for longer, but they weren't very good in the 20th century. Every response had to be pre-programmed. So machine learning has really opened up the possibility of these kinds of agents. So, part of what's allowed that to happen, of course, very smart people, including in this university, have been developing better algorithms. Also, there's a lot more computing power available now. I'm sure many of you heard of Moore's law and the very rapid increase in processing speed and so on that we've seen over the recent decades. But of course, if you're going to have machine learning, you need something to learn from. And so what's really allowed that to happen is the digitization of everything, the rise of the internet and everything being moved online, because that's, of course, created an immense data set from which machine learning can learn, whether it's learning about images or texts or what have you. So, by far the largest database in human history. So in 2018, the first GPT was released. It was pretty good, but not revolutionary as a chatbot. In 2019 came GPT-2, which was a little better. That was trained on 1.5 billion parameters. The next year, 2020, came GPT-3, was trained on 175 billion parameters, so 100 times more. And GPT-3 was genuinely considered a revolution when it came out in conversational AI. And then the end of last year, 2022, ChatGPT really stunned people again. And as I say, give it a go if you haven't. It is incredible. And it broke all records for the fastest growth in user base, the fastest take-up of any technology in history. 100 million monthly active users within 2 months of launching. So if you think of how quickly it took, the printing press to spread around the world, or electrification, or the automobile, it took decades and decades for cars to spread. 100 million users within 2 months. One researcher has estimated that ChatGPT is now outputting an amount of text equivalent to the entire printed works of humanity since the invention of the printing press every 2 weeks. So, and now already we have GPT-4. It's not on this chart. We have GPT-4. It has 100 trillion parameters. So it's already better again. So here we have an astonishing example of the exponential acceleration in the rate of technological transformation. So not only are these developments remarkable in themselves, but they, of course, allow further innovations. They drive further advances. LLMs are proving to be, like GPT, are proving to be incredibly useful already. I mean, within months of it appearing, people are starting to build it into their daily practice, their work practice, their industrial processes, and so on, even while the technology is on an almost weekly basis continuing to improve. And there are many other similar kinds of revolutions in other aspects of AI. And I think what we're seeing with AI is helpful for understanding why technological transformation is accelerating. And it is because technologies are tightly interlinked. One breakthrough enables many others. Think of the printing press or steam or electrification or the internal combustion engine, the computer, of course. So it's a bit like technology is a kind of family tree that might start at the top with fire or something. And as one new technology is developed, it allows further ones to proliferate, And many, of course, then interact and allow others, and processes like globalization and standardization and better education and so on all contribute to this kind of exponential growth. So, if we turn to the long timeline of technology here, we see many notable inventions that are listed. I've written a bit small, I apologize. But many of the notable inventions are what we call general purpose technologies that really have the power to transform whole economies and whole societies and unlock many further innovations. So AI is such a general purpose technology like, electricity or the internal combustion engine. But even among general purpose technologies, it's very distinctive because it can be used to further innovate. It is already being used in drug discovery and many other aspects of scientific and technological research. It's being used to personalize medicine. It's being used for prototyping and design. Some of you would have heard of the AlphaFold success that DeepMind had in helping to unravel the secrets of many proteins and so on. So, the mathematician I.G. Good said a long time ago, the first ultra-intelligent machine is the last invention that man need ever make. So unlike other general-purpose technologies that simply unlock new possibilities, AI is taking over some of the process of innovation itself. Now, expert opinion is divided on whether there really will be this kind of ultra-intelligent machine that allows us to totally put our feet up and leave it all to this sort of godlike robot. But obviously, if we do create such a thing, then we really ain't seen nothing yet with regard to the increase in technological development. Of course, one thing a super powerful AI could do is create even more super powerful AI. and so on. And of course, those machines, those systems could be used to solve many other problems, electricity too cheap to meter and all of that. But even if you don't believe, and as I say, experts are divided in that kind of super powerful, ultra intelligence, then it really is nonetheless totally clear that we will be seeing AI continue to accelerate the process of technological transformation. So, how do we use this big picture context of technological transformation to help us make sense of the AI moment? Firstly, I think it's important to understand that the rate of technological transformation is completely unprecedented. So on the one hand, it's precedented, in as much as it's always been accelerating, but that does mean at any given point in human history, like now, it's happening at a rate that is completely unprecedented. So we really are seeing technological transformation at a speed that humans have never seen before. And I think that's really crucial to understanding the challenges of AI, which is, of course, in the vanguard of this transformation. So before we dive into really thinking about what this means for AI, I want to think about what kind of risks and challenges technological transformation has historically posed. So, of course, it's important to always have in mind that technological transformation has brought immense benefits, immense prosperity. There are many more people alive on the planet now than ever before, and that certainly would never have been possible without technological transformation. It's possible because of engineering sewage systems and antibiotics and nitrogen fixation that allows for fertilizers that allow enough food to be grown and so on. So there are many more people alive, and they're living healthier and longer lives than ever before. So all of this is only possible because of technological transformation. That's clear. So the benefits are absolutely immense. Of course, they're not distributed evenly, and there have been enormous costs and risks in getting to where we are today. And that's what I want to briefly highlight. So take the printing press, for example. Invented around 1450, the contribution to learning has obviously been immense. We couldn't imagine anything like the modern world without the printing press. But one of the most immediate consequences of the printing press was the spread of Reformation literature, work critical of the Roman Catholic Church, like the work of Martin Luther. And that work, along with other works that were critical of the feudal system that was prevalent at the time, led to what's sometimes called the Peasants' War, where peasants rose up all across Europe, causing widespread mayhem and suffering and death. And that war was relatively brief, but as you know, Catholics and Protestants continued to then wage war for many centuries afterwards. So we might think that technology is in itself neutral. Humans can do what they like with it. It's up to humans what they do with it. We might think it's beneficial. Of course, it has been immensely beneficial. But at the same time, it caused immense disruption and suffering. Or take the Industrial Revolution that I mentioned earlier. Again, the technological transformations of this period are absolutely foundational to our modern way of life. Our modern way of life is unimaginable without, trains and electricity, the telegraph, a factory, and so on. But at the same time, it was, of course, immensely disruptive and exploitative. The consequences of the Industrial Revolution, which demanded new ways of working, new ways of organizing, new resources, new markets, shifted populations from the countryside, destroyed old ways of life. People moved to the cities where they worked in terrible conditions for poor pay. It fueled colonialism and the aggressive pursuit of resources and new markets, and led to the rise of communism, of course, and to fascism. And in civil wars and interstate wars, many millions and millions of people were killed. So, if I can be gloomy for a moment, we can summarize perhaps some of the kind of tribulations that arise from technological transformation as the four horsemen of the technological apocalypse, channeling my friends from the Center for Study of Existential Risk. So the first one, changing economic dynamics, so inequality. When we look at historic examples or contemporary ones like the one I just mentioned from the Industrial Revolution, it's clear that, that just as they increase prosperity, it isn't evenly distributed and might not be for many generations. So as I say, whole ways of life, skilled workers who worked in their cottages or in their communities, their skills were made utterly obsolete, they were made redundant and so on. They had a choice of perhaps going to work in a city in terrible conditions. I mentioned colonialism and so on. So even while the world became more prosperous through these inventions, there was a great deal of inequality. Changing power dynamics. Again, this can be hugely positive as technologies empower more people to participate in civic life. But it can at the same time be highly disruptive. I mentioned the printing press and the challenges that allowed to the dominance of the Catholic Church. Well, you might agree with those arguments. You might not, but you might. But whether you agree with them or not, my point is they were incredibly disruptive and led to many centuries of conflict. Again, think of the rise of guns, how that allowed Europeans to conquer other countries, or the rise of the radio and how that allowed the spread of fascism. Think back to the sort of the cliched communist and militaristic takeovers of the Cold War. The first target for any putsch was the television station, of course, because the television allowed you to reach the whole population. So technologies have crucial roles in power dynamics. The third thing I'll mention are externalities, by which I very broadly mean kind of implications that aren't intrinsic to the process of a given technology's use. So, things that perhaps unintended consequences. Environmental degradation is the most obvious. We now know, because we're very much living with climate change as a product of the use of fossil fuels to fuel the Industrial Revolution and so on. And there are countless more examples, pesticides and such like. And finally, war. And all of the above three can, of course, lead to war. And many of the examples I've given of tribulations arising from technological transformation have been examples of war. Of course, every war is highly contingent upon very specific local circumstances. I'm sure it's very rare that you can really say any given conflict was entirely caused by technology. But what we can say is that they were factors. The arms race in dreadnoughts, the big metal warships between England and Germany, certainly wasn't the only cause of the First World War, but it was an important contributory factor, as was competition for new markets for industrial processes, so on. So, all of these challenges and risks relate to the specifics of any given technological transformation, but they also relate to the speed at which it's happening. Now, if a way of life is being changed by innovation over the course of generations, then it's much easier to accommodate and respond to that than if it happens, in a decade or in years, if people are suddenly put out of work, for example. And that's why it matters so much that the speed of change is accelerating. That's why these exponential curves make such a big difference. Okay, so let's think about what this means for some of the challenges associated with AI. So I noted earlier that previous waves have been immensely beneficial, and certainly that will also be true of AI, and I want us to always have that in mind. I'm not opposed to AI. I am paid to worry about it and think about all the ways it might go wrong, but what motivates us to do that is the belief that we can manage those challenges to make it go very well. And I've colleagues in the Centre for Human-Inspired AI that I mentioned earlier are working very hard to make sure it go well. There really will be immense benefits. If we can manage the challenges, then we really will lead much more prosperous, healthy lives 100 years from now because of this transformation. But we need to manage the challenges. So let's go back to the four horsemen of the technological apocalypse and think about how they apply to AI. So first of all, inequality. Now, some of you might have heard of the idea of bias in AI, and wonder where it comes from or what it means. Well, I mentioned earlier that current AI means machine learning to a large extent, and machine learning learns from data sets, and those data sets can often embed injustices, particularly historic injustices. So, think of them as snapshots of the world at a particular moment and the way that world is set up. So, for example, say you're a police force and you want a predictive policing system that's going to tell you where crimes are more likely. So you look at the history of where crimes have happened, that's your data set. But because of a history of racial injustice in a given society, it might be that a certain area where it has a certain population has historically been over-policed. If your police force has given it much more attention, if you keep sending all your policemen in that direction, you're going to get more arrests there. So you'd have more, all the data is going to be telling you that's where the crimes happen. If you feed that into your machine learning system and ask it where the next crimes are going to happen, it's going to tell you to go there. So you send your police there, so they make more arrests there, and so it becomes perpetuated. So that's one of the problems with AI bias. It's effectively replicating historic injustices. Or in another sort of famous example, some of you might have read about it. It comes from Amazon. I need to give credit to any Amazon colleagues present or elsewhere, because Amazon identified this problem and set about solving it. But it's such a wonderfully clear example that I have to give it. Basically, they trained a machine learning algorithm to help them sort CVs for people applying to work for them. And historically, women were vastly underrepresented in the workforce. So the machine learning algorithm identified that what Amazon clearly wants is men. So it started sorting CVs, and if it said something like member of a women's rowing team, then it dismissed them. So of course it wasn't reading their names. For gender wasn't on there. You can remove, say you ask people for gender and then think, no, we can't judge by gender. Let's take that away. But of course your CV is still telling you what gender if it says, a member of the women's 11 or whatever it might be. So that's a classic example of the way these kind of algorithms replicate historic biases. So that's one way they can perpetuate inequality. Another is, of course, just putting people out of work. Robots taking our jobs is a cliche, but it will happen. Already, friends of mine in the business world are already saying, I was going to hire 100 new people, but now I don't need to because I've got GPT. And, BT, British Telecom announced earlier this summer that they were laying off, was it 55,000 staff? Not all of them because of AI, but a significant number of them to be replaced by AI systems. So, we might all become more prosperous, but you're not going to feel that if you've been put out of work. And maybe not just put out of work, but put out of work for which you are highly trained and highly specialized. Think of how much designers are worrying right now. If, we've talked about large language models like GPT, but exactly the equivalents exist for generating images. Try DALL-E, try Midjourney, they are amazing. So designers are very worried. These are people with extremely specialized skills they've spent years honing. So, prosperity, general prosperity is all well and good, but if you lose your job. So, and that, of course, creates instability. So that's, think of, already we've experienced the rise of Trumpism. I'll mention it again in a minute, but, dissatisfied workers, 1 million of them, can cause a lot of trouble, a lot of disruption. We've already experienced Trumpism, but imagine that with a few million truck drivers and attendant workers who do, man the diners and gas stations, all put out of work by the rise of autonomous vehicles and so on. So that, of course, leads into the next issue of changing power dynamics. There are lots of ways in which AI could do this. It's very hard to predict. I think that's perhaps the hardest thing about working in this area at all, is that the real consequences of technological transformation are often extremely hard to predict. When engineers in the 90s in CERN and here in Cambridge were building the internet, were they worrying about the death of the high street? No, of course they weren't. But the rise of internet shopping has that as one of its consequences. So these kind of dynamics are very hard to predict. But some of the issues people are worrying about, of course, the rise of surveillance. You might have heard the term surveillance capitalism. These huge companies like Google and Facebook who make money by extracting our data and effectively selling that in order to gain money from very personalized advertising, for example. So, surveillance, but also surveillance by states, of course. There was a moment, you might remember, around the Arab Spring where people were very excited about the use of digital technology to empower the people. But we can equally see other examples, in Russia and China, where these technologies are being used to oppress and control people. Thirdly, externalities and environmental impact. This is perhaps more obvious from, the dark satanic mills of the Industrial Revolution, and climate change that stemmed from that. But it is also a big issue for AI and the digital revolution. All of these devices, our laptops and smartphones, use something called rare earth minerals, which are mined in just a few places around the world, and in a way that's extremely damaging to the environment, digging huge open pits that have very serious environmental consequences. They produce an enormous amount of waste, acids, heavy metals, radioactive material even. And computation itself is incredibly energy intensive. So it's all very well, we talk about the cloud as if all our data is now stored, in some sort of ethereal place. Of course, it isn't. It's stored in vast, incredibly energy-hungry data centers around the world. So, it's possible that AI will be part of the solution, and there are smart people, including in this university, who are thinking about how AI can be used to help address some of our climate problems. Hopefully that will work out, but at the moment, the digitization of everything comes at a big cost. And the fourth of these four horsemen of the AI apocalypse, war. Now, I think there are a number of ways in which the AI revolution could make war more likely. Of course, war is often a product of exactly the kind of disruptions that I've already sketched. But a million people being put out of work and that leading to revolution, like the storming of Capitol Hill, seen here, and civil war. I mean, recently, I was talking to an American colleague who was over, who was saying that she genuinely fears civil war in the US. If Trump is elected again, and so on. At the same time, it's possible it will enhance the possibility of great power conflict. So, you can read a lot now about a new bipolar world, not between the US and Russia, but between the US and China, and the idea of an AI arms race is a term you hear a lot, which is very dangerous rhetoric, which encourages people to say, no, we can't worry about ethics and governance, we don't have time, this is an arms race, don't you know, we have to get there before, the others, whoever, China, Russia, whoever, before someone else does. This is very, very, very dangerous rhetoric, and we've seen that bring us to the brink of destruction, of course, during the Cold War. So, those are all the things that keep me in gainful employment, worrying about. What can we do to make AI go well? So those are the risks. What can we do about challenges? Well, what I've been trying to convey is that the challenges of AI aren't just one thing. It's not just AI bias. It's not a machine becoming conscious and rising up against us. It's this really, really big picture of the world around us changing incredibly quickly, quicker than it ever has for any generation before us. That's the real challenge. And of course, there are issues that are quite specific to AI, but the big picture consequences of those issues are ones we've seen many times before, injustice and so on. And the worry is that we'll see them play out very quickly, quicker than we can try to address them. But I think perhaps more than previous technological transformations, we know about this. We're thinking about it. I'm not sure if there was a kind of Industrial Revolution Ethics Centre in Cambridge 200 years ago, but there is an AI Ethics Centre, and not just one. There are lots of people around this university and other universities thinking about how to make this transformation go well. So what can we do? Well, recently I was at a small workshop on AI policy. There was only about 10 people in the room. And at the end, everyone was asked to sum up what they thought was the most important. And the first person said, well, I think what really matters is training the engineers themselves to think responsibly about what they're doing, so they know what it means to, de-bias a data set, and so they really understand the impacts of the technology and the ways it can go wrong. And the next person said, no, that's ridiculous. You can't expect engineers to do that. It's not part of their training, and that just lets the companies off the hook. We should focus on corporate responsibility and culture and practice in those corporations. We should think about ensuring they do really rigorous impact assessments for new products and that they have ethics boards and so on. But the next person said, no, you cannot possibly trust corporations to do this. It's ridiculous. It's not in their interest. What we need is hard national regulation to clearly set minimum standards and to make sure there's real legal accountability for when things go wrong. Then the next person said, look, but regulating AI tools, that's not enough. What really matters is social policy, because the way this is going to play out is in people being put out of work and needing retraining. We need a better welfare system, universal basic income, and so on. You have to think about it from a social point of view, not just the technology itself. And the next person said, no, it doesn't make any sense to think of it at a national level. AI crosses borders. You know, we're using Chinese AI and American AI. The problems cross borders, the challenges do. So what we need is international treaty-based governance structures that can, help us avoid the kind of war that I mentioned and set international standards. And then the next person said, no. The current structures we have are not in the least bit fit for purpose. The real problem is capitalism. What we need is a new world order. We need to address the exploitative racial capitalism that's a legacy of colonialism, but allows huge companies to flourish that are, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, well, which of these is right? Well, the answer is, of course, in a way, all of them. There is no one magic bullet that's going to help us to, solve the problems and challenges of AI. That, again, has been part of my message, that the problems of technological transformation are immense, and they're social, and they're political, and they're economic, as well as being, in a way, quite narrow and specific ones to do with the technology itself. So yes, we need to think about the technology itself, but we need to think about this much bigger picture too. And that's what we try to do in the 3 centers that I oversee, in the new institute that we're founding, and in many other places across the university. So to sum up, we're living through a really extraordinary time, and I want us to be optimistic about it. It is an amazing time to be alive. I'm excited to see, just what the world will look like 10 years from now, and the technologies we'll have at our fingertips. So much of what's going to happen is going to be good, and the lesson of history is that it will allow us to live longer, healthier, better, more prosperous lives. But history has other lessons too, and it's those that I've tried to point to. That the technological transformation can cause immense disruption to our society, to our politics, to our ways of life. And even while they might be manageable in the long run, they can be very costly in the short run. So we should welcome, I think, the immense opportunities that AI brings. To make that transition a smooth one, we'll have to adapt. But at the same time, I think we should always be guided by a clear vision of what a kind and fair and just society looks like. Thank you all for coming along, and